In this video, we'll do a quick review of classifying triangles. Now, this should be familiar information to you. You've been reviewing triangles for several years now, but we can identify triangles based on their side lengths, or we can name triangles and classify them based on their angle measures. And if we want to be most specific about talking about a triangle, we can identify it by a combination of one of our words that describes the sides, along with a word that describes it based on angles. So let's quickly go through. We'll start with the side lengths. And this triangle is probably the one that's most familiar to all of us because it has equal sides. And you can see it has equal sides because of the markings we see here. Okay, so this is referred to, as you should all know, as an equilateral triangle. Let's try that again. This is referred to as an equilateral triangle. Now this will have all equal sides, as you can see. Actually, instead of saying equal, why don't we use the better word for it, all congruent sides. In other words, 3 congruent sides. But also you should notice, and that's what you can see the angle measures are all 60 degrees, but you should be able to see by these little markings, this is the way that we can mark angles as being congruent. So we also want to say that all congruent angles. So again, this is the triangle that I think most of us are able to identify most easily. So an equilateral triangle, equal, you notice the word equal is in there, just tells us there's all congruent or all equal sides, and all congruent or all congruent angles. I want to change that. So go back and update what we just wrote there, all congruent angles. So moving on to the next type of triangle. The next type of triangle that we see here, you notice based on the markings, we have congruent sides, but not all. We just have 2 congruent sides. So, or we can say a pair of congruent sides. And for that matter, we also have, without knowing their measure, we have a pair of congruent angles. Okay, so we have a pair, meaning we have 2 congruent sides, and we have 2 congruent angles. This is called, as you probably know, an isosceles triangle. Okay, so isosceles is when we have 2 congruent sides, and just by default, we will have 2 congruent angles. The last triangle we have, there is nothing that is congruent. Okay, so this last one, you notice we have a single tick mark there, a double tick mark on that next side, and a triple tick mark on that third side. That means these side lengths all have their own measures. You also notice that the angles, there's a single arc that tells us there's a one unique measure for that angle. There's a double arc here, which means there's a different measure for that angle. And then there's the third arc, which means that there is a third and unique measure for that angle. So here, there are no congruent sides. And for that matter, there are no congruent angles. This is called a scalene triangle. So you should be able to brush up quickly on those. Your equilateral, all sides equal. Your scalene, two sides equal. And your isosceles, two sides equal. And your scalene, no sides equal. So that's just describing triangles based on their side lengths. The other way we can obviously look at triangles is based on their angle measures, okay? So we already know how to describe angles. Less than 90 degrees is acute, greater than 90 degrees, less than 180 is obtuse, and exactly 90 degrees is a right angle. Those are the same types of words that we use for measuring or for describing triangles based on their angles. You look at this first triangle, you notice that there's an angle of 59 degrees, an angle of 66 degrees, and an angle of 55 degrees. All of those are acute angles, and as a result, this is called an acute triangle. That will give us that will be a triangle in which all angles are acute. Now remember, that means angles that are less than 90 degrees, okay? We're just going to put that as a reminder. The next type of triangle we're going to move on to, and in no particular order we're dealing with these, you notice that there is a right angle here. So as a result, we call this a right triangle. So it will have one right angle. Now it's important for us to know that a triangle's angles add up to 180. Notice 60 plus 30 is 90, plus another 90 is 180 degrees. If I were to go back up here and add up these three angle measures, 59 plus 66 plus 55, we would get 180 degrees. So if I start out with one of my angles being 90 degrees because it's a right angle, then the remaining two angles have to make up the other 90 degrees. Okay, so that's just an interesting observation to make, and we'll work with that more when we talk about the triangles class. So our last triangle, oh, by the way, when we talk about a right triangle, we should also notice that because these two remaining angles have to add up to 90, that it would be impossible, it would be absolutely impossible for us ever to have a right triangle that has an obtuse angle as one of the other angles in it, okay? So that's really important to know. So, speaking of which, when we move on to talking about the last type of triangle based on its angles, you notice here we have an obtuse angle. That angle is greater than 90 degrees, but less than 180. So this is called an obtuse triangle. So this will be a triangle that has one and only one obtuse angle. Now remember, an obtuse angle, I'm going to use X as my angle measure. It has to be greater than 90, but less than 180 degrees. Okay, so it has only one angle that is greater than 90, but less than 180. And if all of these angles add up to 180 degrees, it would be impossible for us to have more than one of these obtuse angles. Because if I already have an angle that's, say, 100, and I try to add another angle that's also obtuse, let's call it 91, 100 plus 91 is already over 180 degrees without ever being able to have anything left over for the third angle, okay? So we have we have a problem for you to work on your Google form, or we have problems for you to work on your Google form based on these notes. So refer back to these notes as you need to, refer back to this video as you need to, and give your best effort on the first effort on that Google form.